All right. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're doing good. Tonight we have a great guest. John Klyczek is back, and we talked a couple of years ago, and John's back. How you doing, John? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Perfect.
Good to be back.
Yes, sir. Just one second. Oh, man. My allergies are going crazy today. It sucks. All right. We're live, so be careful.
All right.
Don't say crazy things, except
Um, Except everything we're going to talk
accepting
about, right?
accepting code and everything that we're talking about. Correct.
Okay. Good. We're waiting for the people to pile in here.
Well, we can go ahead and start. They'll pile in. So tonight we're going to be talking about Malthusianism, Barbara Marx Hubbard, limits to growth, AI, and how this is really dystopian in terms of the effects on education. And you're a professor now, right?
Yeah, adjunct professor. Yes, sir.
Cool. Yeah, I think last time we talked, you were not yet a professor, or were you? I don't remember.
Oh, still adjunct. Been adjunct forever. Not full time. Not tenure track, but that's yeah.
Well, that's good enough. I mean, you're still a professor, so honored to have you. Thanks for coming on. And John, of course, is the author of School World Order, and I will link our previous interview in this interview afterwards. But I had to hurry because we were out of town, and I just now got in here, so I had to make this really quick. And the thumbnail dude didn't make the thumbnail yet, so I would have already had the thumbnail, but it's not up yet. But I'll have it later. Anyway, so tell us first before we get into your new articles and the new video that you've done here and the stuff that's over at Unlimited Hangout. Tell us about School World Order, what prompted that book, and the overall thesis that you have in that text.
So, school world order, I can break it down into basically two broader sections. One has to do with the privatization of education, largely through school choice vouchers, other public-private partnerships, charter schools, etc. And then the second half of the book basically expands on how technology is used to expand upon the privatization. And then I could break the technologies down into basically three categories. So one is adaptive learning courseware, another one is socio-emotional biofeedback wearables, and then the third one has to do with something called precision education, which is personalized education based on your genetics. And then from there, I go into how all the data that's mined from those various technologies are going to be used to develop AI algorithms, and then eventually to interface the human body with the AI through brain-computer interfaces and other types of brain-machine interfaces. What prompted me to write the book was a few different things. Sort of all came together at once. So as I'm a professor, adjunct professor, and there was a moment back in it was before Trump got in when the governor of Illinois, Bruce Rauner, was stalling on the budget, and basically I saw this as a ploy to push public services into private receivership. He's a big charter school pusher, cradle to career buzzwords and all that stuff. He actually there's a Rauner college prep. And I'd heard a lot of the buzzwords that Charlotte Thompson Iserbeek wrote about in The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. She's also the person that wrote the foreword to my book. I actually went and spent a whole month with her at one point. She passed away last year. Basically, gave me everything she had, all her books, all her files. And at the time, I was also working for an online tutoring company. And that company, it wanted to pilot or co-pilot IBM's Watson with us. And IBM's Watson, it's an AI program. It can do adaptive learning courseware, but it can do all kinds of other predictive analytics. So I basically surmised that, or inferred that, every day I went to work, I was basically training Watson to replace me. So all this stuff was sort of going on. And lo and behold, my department got shut down. And so I didn't really plan to write about education, wanted to kind of keep a buffer between my workspace and my research. And then at that point, there was really no buffer left. So I wrote an article about it. Charlotte read it. One article turned into another, and then it became a book. And now, after lockdowns, I'm basically living my book. So
I remember our conversation. I'm sorry, I had the mute button there, and I'm trying to remember Did we get into? Did Obamacare play a role in this process that you're talking about? Because I remember they were talking at the time about when Obama was first pushing Obamacare, that this would be somehow related to transitioning things over into AI and basically iPads having a huge role in education. Is that part of this at all, or not?
Sort of. So one thing I can note is that there were two Common Core tests. One of them is PARCC, it's PARCC, and the acronym escapes my memory at the time. And there was another one. So there was two basically standardized tests that were going to replace the old standardized test for No Child Left Behind. This was converted or rebranded as Race to the Top. And one of those, it's either the PARCC or the other standardized test. Was basically one of the first pilots for adaptive learning courseware. So those tests were all electronic, and it would use adaptive learning courseware. And what that is it's basically it's a build on B.F. Skinner's his analog teaching machines, right? And so basically, his idea of programmed instruction was that you could personalize education through some mechanical means that could provide immediate response so that the students could either, if they're really smart, they could work faster. If they're not so smart, they could be remediated, and you don't have to worry about somebody getting left behind or being held back. And basically it used his operant conditioning algorithm. So you take the learning stimuli, and based on how the student responds to it, it'll either expedite that student to higher learning, or again, it'll remediate that student. And so the adaptive learning courseware basically just converts everything to digital windows, clicks on a mouse, maybe gamifies it, puts some video games in there or some other videos to make it more interactive. So in that way, Common Core sort of pushed us in that direction. But there's another project, which also is another form of privatization, actually. But there's a whole slew of pedagogical moves that fall under a branch of community education. And community education, you can break this down into basically three important categories. One of those has to do with wraparound services, and these are going to be public-private partnerships between the school and either healthcare, maybe criminal justice, maybe job training for jobs that are in demand. But a component of that, in order to funnel, they call them pipeline services as well. And in order to pipeline the students into the correct wraparound services, they needed ubiquitous data collection. And so again, there's the whole the digital data tracking that sort of got started with Common Core, and later it becomes community schooling.
So one thing that I think you kind of break through the matrix with, in terms of the dialectic of public versus private, a lot of times libertarians approach this issue and they characterize it as this is the tyranny of the state taking over education if we just had freedom. But you're focusing on the fact that it's not just the problem of the state. There's a problem that transcends the libertarian public-private problem, right? It's a combination of public and private issues. And so what would you say to the sort of the typical advocate for homeschooling or criticizing state education? It usually comes from that libertarian ethos, and some of that's correct, but I think you're right to point out, but there's also more to this, because there's also a privatization element that's also part of the problem, right?
Yeah, so you can basically look at the history of American education in three broad phases. And so the first one is basically creating the compulsory education system. Right? And so this starts with Horace Mann back in the 1800s.
Right.
Then early 20th century, you start to get basically the federalization of education. Right. So we get the Department of Education in the late 70s, but there's sort of a process of, before that, it was the HUE, Health, Education, and Welfare Department. And so it was an increasing integration of the state and local education agencies with the federal government. And then this next phase, I would call it the corporate phase. And that's not a corporate phase in the sense of, again, sort of just moving away from the federalization, but it's sort of an integration of the two. And with the corporate part, like with school choice, okay, ultimately what you have is a publicly, federally subsidized form of pseudo private education. But it's actually worse than the federalization because it has all the federal strings attached, except that it has none
Yes.
of the public recourse, meaning there's no elected school boards. And we all know that there's tons of problems with elected school boards, but at least you have somewhere to complain, and at least you have the ability to vote people out and possibly put somebody new in. If you have a private charter school, although it will be beholden to the mandates of the Fed, it's not, there's no elected school board. It's basically a corporate board like any other company. So you largely don't have much of a voice there. So in many ways, it's worse. As far as homeschooling, I mean, that's, at the time I wrote the book, before all things post 2020, right? It came out in 2019. I was hoping that might have been a way to sort of reform public education from the inside. I've been 100% advocating homeschooling since. But again, we need to be careful that when we move into a homeschooling situation, that we don't basically bring in a corporate charter school or a virtual charter school like K-12 Inc., which again, right, just puts us, you're basically bringing the federal government into your house with all of big tech surveillance capabilities.
Gotcha. Now, in terms of your recent work, and I'm assuming that maybe when you are writing about Malthusianism and New Age spirituality, are these potentially future chapters in a future book, or are these going to be separate from any new book that you're doing?
That it definitely dovetails with my broader research on education. But in many ways, I actually just kind of wanted to take a break from writing about education. So I had finished a series on this global union that's known as Education International. It's tied to the WEF. And when I finished that for Unlimited Hangout, I asked Whitney if there was anything she might like covered that's not education, so I could maybe take a break, mix it up for her a little bit. And there was some memes going around, a quote from Hubbard, this Riders of the Pale Horse quote. And so she kind of wanted me to dig into that, and that what I thought was going to be a shorter article became two pieces, and then there's going to be a third one, and definitely a fourth one, maybe a fifth.
Well, let's start with that, and I'm going to put it in the chat for everybody. They can, and I'll link this later after the live stream ends. So here it is for you guys. Here's the first essay we're going to be talking about, which is the article titled Barbara Malthusian Hubbard, From Limits to Growth to UN Agenda 2030. And the question is, does she call for the culling of 1/4 of the human population? And the quote is that John's talking about. I'll just read it real quick. The riders of the Pale Horse, which is from this purported to be the 1993 Book of Co-Creation book. I'm not saying it's not true. It's just that the point is that you're writing the article digging into what's this quote all about, and it says, out of the full spectrum of the human personality, 1/4 is elected to transcend. 1/4 are for destruction, defective seeds. In the past, they were permitted to die a natural death. Now, as we approach the quantum shift from the creature human to the creative human, the human who is an inheritor of godlike powers, the destructive 1/4 must be eliminated from the social body. Fortunately, you are not responsible for this act. We are. We are in charge of God's selection process for planet Earth. He selects and we destroy. We are the riders on the pale horse, or death. So tell us about this. This sounds crazy.
Yeah, and I actually have an update since this article. I've been meaning to post this update. So I guess I'll just walk you through sort of the investigative process. So I looked and I looked and I looked, tried to find the primary source on that, right? So most people say it's the Book of Co-Creation, and that's this book right here, right? Revelation, Book of Co-Creation, about 93.
Okay.
And it's not in there, all right? It's not in there. The quote is not in there. So I was able to track down an email from, I think it was Dave Hartley was the guy's name. Just double check that. Yeah, Dave Hartley. And he sent out an email, a mass email, and somehow it got back to Hubbard. And you can find this email at the Mail Archive, but of course you can link, it's linked in my article. And in there, there's you don't know whose email it is because it anonymizes it. So this is not necessarily verified either. But in this exchange, Hubbard basically acknowledges that she wrote it, but that he's misinterpreting it, right? And that basically her book was about a way that we could avoid going through the Armageddon and the apocalypse that's predicted in the Bible. So later what happened was there was a group of people, some of her colleagues, who they did a stream and critiqued my first piece on transhumanism and Hubbard. And
wait, hold on. You're saying her colleagues critiqued your stream?
Yeah, well, they critiqued my article on one of their streams.
Gotcha.
And it's called I think they're called The New View. Ellen Brown is one of them. Well, better known name. There's a few others. Can't really, some of their names escape me, but so I reached out to them and decided, let's have a dialogue here. I mean, like, let's, it was a friendly dialogue. It's sort of a debate-ish, and it was cordial, and we hashed out our differences, and hopefully came to some common understanding, because all of them were disturbed that Hubbard was promoting or transhumanism and some of the Malthusian stuff, and they were basically incredulous, right? And they sort of walked them through the primary sources on it. But after the interview, one of the women that I was in touch with had gone on a hike with a guy, and this guy used to work for Stan Monteith at Radio Liberty. And he sent me sort of an excerpt of this so-called unpublished manuscript. So supposedly, Hubbard, when she claims that she wrote it, she said that there was an unpublished draft or an unpublished manuscript of what's printed here in the Revelation, the Book of Co-Creation. And so I contacted that guy, and then I said, do you know how Stan got a copy of it? He said, no, I don't know. He says, but maybe Constance Cumby knows. And Constance Cumby, she wrote this book here, the Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow, one of the seminal books.
Yeah, my wife is reading that book right now.
Oh, okay, very cool. So he put me in contact with her. So I gave her a phone call, and apparently I'm supposed to go up to Michigan and interview her, and she's going to let me look through her library and maybe scan or get a copy of the unpublished manuscript, which I have here. I can actually show it if I can share my screen. But she sent me this thing, and apparently so Hubbard, this was before she was getting funded from Lawrence Rockefeller. She basically was like printing these things at like Kinko's or Xerox or something. They're basically just like, little spiral notebooks. And that I guess it was over time the editors decided that some of this rhetoric was a bit much. So here, let me.
Well, just a quick note: you can share the screen; everybody will see it. But you might be interested that I have a friend who told me to get this rare book a while back, and it's called Millennium. Are you familiar with this?
No.
So this has a bunch of these same people in it, including Jonas Salk, Carl Rogers, Timothy Leary, Willis Harman, Marilyn Ferguson, on and on, and Barbara Marx Hubbard. And her chapter is called Conscious Evolution. And Conscious Evolution it doesn't have the specific dark horse phrase that you're talking about, but it is 100% about how we're going to have to, transcend all previous thinking. There's a whole section on the Gaia hypothesis. So she has a chapter, or they have two sections on the Gaia hypothesis, and that evolutionary consciousness, God speaks through evolutionary consciousness, and basically we are co-creators with God, and we're going to have to. I mean, again, there might be something hinting at the depopulation in here. So I haven't read this whole chapter, but because I just remembered that she's in this book, so I was like, I bet John would like to take a look at this book. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely. I do want to check that out. Did you say I could click this screen share here?
Yeah, it's up. You're up. You can be. Go ahead.
Oh, it says host disabled
Oh
participant
wait, hold
screen.
on. Let's see. I think I can do that in the settings.
While you're doing that, I'll just read a little piece of so before I found out about this unpublished manuscript, um, I I deduced, or I had at least surmised that it was credible, that the email was credible, and that there was a previous draft, because there's a longer quote in my article that's from the published manuscript, in which it sounds very similar to the one that's in the unpublished manuscript. So I'll just pull out some excerpts here. So like it starts off at a time of quantum transformation. So it's using the quantum language again. The
Yeah.
momentum of past activities forces those activities to overshoot the mark. Be fruitful and multiply goes too far and becomes overpopulation. Preservation of life goes too far and results in undesirable prolongation of creatures' human existence. Give food and shelter to people becomes the over-industrialization, pollution, inflation, and resource depletion by the developed world. So you can see all the Malthusian premises regarding resources, population, and then it goes on there, and she gives more and more examples of this. And at some point, at the end of this longer excerpt, it says, "Only those who choose to live on shall. The others will voluntarily go to their rest. This is the new condition toward which the magnificent achievements of the past have taken you." So basically, it's pretty much saying the same thing. It's just not quite as menacing, and it sounds a little more sort of passive. It's like, we're not going to do this. It's just going to happen. And it's not like we're not going to call people necessarily, but it's something that we'll have, whether it be as she says in the email, other forces, or the Malthusian catastrophe itself. So, but if I pull up the, I think you probably got it now. It says still disabled.
Yeah, I'm looking. I don't see an option of where it allows me to allow you, like, because if I go under share screen, it's all about whether I can share the screen.
Do you got a secure? Is there like a security, like a shield or something like that on your end? I feel like sometimes when I've done that, when I've been on the other end of this process, there's like a shield somewhere down there that says security or something, and then if you click on that, it'll
Let's ask the chat. Does anybody in the chat know where I can allow this? Because I see accessibility, keyboard shortcuts, feedback, statistics, recording, share screen. You think it would be under share screen, but it's not.
well, maybe I'll just
So I'm on Zoom for those that are wondering. I have my shields up, attack shields down. Mute, blah blah blah. I've looked under all the options. I don't see. Let me see. Let me try Zoom.
well,
It doesn't come up under preferences. I don't. Yeah, I
well,
apologize.
what I'll just do is, I'm going to put this because it's just right now it's a PDF.
Okay.
I'm going to put it up in archive.org, and then I'll send you the link, and you can put it in the description or something like that. But one of the things I was going to pull up the longer passage, because it's
Okay.
that's the other thing, is that quote is often chopped up in different ways when you read it on the internet. Most people don't cite it very well. But the manuscript is even worse than that excerpt. Like there's other passages that are very very scary in that same regard. But the
I think
why
I found it. I think I found it. It's actually under the option on the screen, not in the settings. Try it now. I think I've disabled it.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Cool. Got it. All right. So this is it here. This is what Constance sent me. Now, first thing I just want to note here is that look at the title here. It says the revelation, alternative to Armageddon. Now, recall that in that email, that again, there's no indication of the actual email addresses, right? So it's kind of like, okay, we're gonna kind of have to go on good faith here. But if you read her response to this Dave Hartley, she says, "Whoever you are, this quote is taken completely out of context from a manuscript which has not been published. The passage you referred to the thought that we do not need to go through the Armageddon scenario that was predicted in the book of Revelation." And look at the title of this manuscript that Constance said. It's the Revelation Alternative to Armageddon. So, right, again, and I want to go and look at this, manuscript, but me being as skeptical as possible, do I know that Constance, that this is a legit document? I trust her, I believe her. Do I know? The way I would say that I could verify it is by corroborating the three documents, right? By looking at the sort of what's in this email and what's in this title sort of, right, inform each other, right? They're basically both saying what she's saying here in the email is basically implied in the title. So I'm about as sure as I could be that this is legit here. But one of the quotes the longer passage that I had was, so here is there's a few parts where there's 5 different instances in which she talks about the pale horse. This is the one here. And so there it is, basically right there. Fortunately, you dearly beloved are not responsible for this act. We are in charge of God's selection process. The earth, he selects, we destroy. We are the riders of the pale horse, death, etc. Right? But it's many pages, and like I said, I'll put it up on archive.org so everybody can now finally have the provenance of
so
this.
Hold on, this is not working. It automatically defaulted to where it's not showing the Zoom meeting. So
no biggie. We'll like I said, we'll put the link in there. But
can we go back to you? Can you unshare this for a second?
Oh yeah. So,
and let's see if this fixes.
Oh, I know. Wait. Was it because was I supposed to do this? Do you see it now?
No, it has to do with OBS. It's pulling now from. It just reset OBS.
Yes, it is.
Just 1 second. I think this will work. There we go. Yeah, so we can try it one more time. Go ahead and pull your screen share back up. I think I know what to do. I'll have to reset it in OBS. Go ahead. Pull up the screen share now.
So there goes screen share.
All right. It should work now.
It says participants can now see my screen.
Yep. All right. Go ahead. Go. You're good.
Yeah, so basically all I was sort of showing was that the title here, The Revelation, Alternative to Armageddon, Barbara Marx Hubbard, from the book of Co-Creation, Evolutionary Interpretation of the New Testament, that this title implies the same thing that she's saying in her response to Dave Hartley, right? So, I mean, you would assume that if either one of these was somehow fabricated, that, right, they would not corroborate each other. Pretty sure that this is legit. But if you wanted to see the actual quote in here, just to demonstrate that what I'm saying is actually what I'm saying is. What is this? She plays with scripture a lot in here. So there's part of the excerpt. Fortunately, you dearly beloved are not responsible for this act. We are in charge. God's selection process for planet Earth. He selects, we destroy. We are the riders of the pale horse, death. We come to bring death to those who are unable to know God. We do this for the sake of the world. I think the 1/4 thing is up here. And, 1/4. Yeah, out of the full spectrum of human personality, 1/4 is electing to transcend with all their heart, mind, and spirit. 1/4 is ready to choose. Given the example, like I said, it's a lot longer than the excerpt that's in there, but it's right here. So I was as judicious as possible with the information I had at the time, but I do need to do a little update on that article because actually it was worse than I actually reported. So that was my whole process and sort of nailing this down. And like I said, I'm going to do an interview with Constance hopefully very soon. we can get her backstory on all this as well. So.
Yeah, that's great. And so so she got a hold of a copy of that actual text, right? The original.
Yeah, she got it. Her story is that she got it from Barbara herself. So Barbara would go to these conferences and sell them at the conferences, but then she also sold them out of one of her homes. And at one point, she went to her home. She said that Barbara made her crepes, and the crepes were very good. And she was very nice and stuff like that. But I think it was her daughter was the one that was selling them out of the house when she met up with her. And then I guess she used to go around and to these conferences and read from the manuscripts. And at one point, I guess it became this contentious thing where she said that Barbara Marx Hubbard told her she would stop publishing the unpublished manuscript. This is obviously before the book was printed. And she said that she would pop up here and there, and basically she had lied, and that she was still selling the manuscript. Yeah. But she popped around, and she met with Marilyn Ferguson at one point, who authored the Aquarian Conspiracy.
Which is we've covered that text, yeah.
Okay, yeah. At one of these meetings, I want to say it was at Ferguson's. My memory's not so clear.
Ferguson's in this book too, and Barbara Marx Hubbard ends her essay in this future predictive book. By the way, this is about basically when the millennium ends. This was written in 1981, collection of essays from all these New Agers and creeps. And her article says that after arguing that we will transcend cosmic individuality into becoming a cosmic collective consciousness, she says our evolutionary future is an affirmation of the visions of the past. And here's that transhumanist element that you're talking about. Today, the great spiritual premonitions of the prophets are finally finding fulfillment through the fusing of our spiritual and scientific capabilities. What we have considered as paranormal abilities in the pre-scientific period, including astral travel, telekinesis, precognition, may in the future be our inheritance. It is up to our generation to continue the evolutionary quest, to discover what God's plan is, to realize our full potential, and to honor our past as children of Gaia. We begin in good faith to join a community of all the enlightened beings. A desire for a deeper union with creative intelligence is satisfied, and thus separation will be over. So we have this preeminence given to monism and unity. We'll all be blended into some future vague collective. All the prophecies of old will be fulfilled as universal humanity embarks on the adventure of being a conscious human. And this is right after the section about our cybernetic self-extension. So Barbara Marx Hubbard is arguing that transhumanism is what will give us this God status as we evolve to be beyond being individuals.
Yeah, and when I talked to her colleagues, I mean, they were so incredulous about it. At one point in the debate, or dialogue, whatever you want to call it, you could see where they were like, I quoted from one of her manuscripts, and so the quote is, this is from Hubbard's An Evolutionary Synthesis, a New Worldview, Weaving Together a New Mimetic Code for the Optimum Future of Humanity. This is published in 2008. So the quote says, from the perspective of the evolutionary transhumanism, we see a possible convergence of our expanded consciousness with our technologically enhanced body/minds as the next stage of our evolution, when there will be a cosmic cultural convergence of life between transhuman and eventually post-human life, including silicon-based life. And then she adds that in evolutionary transhumanism, the universal human appears for the first time on this earth as a new norm. So she's using the new norm language back there in 2008 as a person incarnating our spiritual, social, and scientific/technological capacities. And when I read that quote to them, they were incredulous, and it was like, did you not read the article? Like, it's like specifically quoted in there, and they're like, send me the link. All right, it's like, I send you the link again, but it's in the article, right? So it's the reason I brought that up is because when was that Millennium published? 90s?
1981.
81. Okay, so she's talking this stuff in the 80s. So
yeah, listen to this. She says, until recently, the human body was primarily an instrument of action. Now the body is becoming the house of thought, not merely something with which to travel and work. If we If a picture could be taken of the extended brain body, it would reveal a variety of extensory capabilities expressed in machines, automobiles, rockets, telescopes, and microscopes and computers. These machines are being cybernated or automated and thus miniaturized. They are becoming intelligent, self-correcting, and self-reproducing. Scientists are now on the threshold of creating what Robert Jastrow of NASA calls silicon-based life forms. Machines are already working automatically to perform these tasks. And then she just talks about a bunch of examples of, computers at home. She says, for an Earth-only species, cybernetics could be a disaster. If we remove the life forms of work and employment from growing populations, it would remove forms of work and employment from growing populations. For a universal species for a universal species beginning to co-create a harmonious planet, these intelligent human extensions will be natural, vital, and essential. If only our intention were to adapt. If our only intention was to adapt to earthly limits, we as humans would have to suppress our evolutionary capabilities. The type of knowledge that is being discovered today is a power too great for the womb of Earth to contain. Recall what happened after the Renaissance, when Savonarola burned books to preserve the faith of the Holy Roman Church, burned heretical seekers after knowledge. Humans today are capable of reenacting these travesties. However, if humanity's intention is to utilize new capabilities and become a universal species working with the God force to build a new heavens and a new earth, then these newfound knowledge and abilities will appear natural. From the perspective of the next stage of evolution, these abilities can be seen as the first efforts of a cosmic baby to crawl, babble, smile, and finally to become universal humanity. So she's saying, like, Star Child in 2001.
Yeah, and actually, she also spoke at Singularity University with a guy by the name of Mark Donahue, who's involved in Singularity U. But for people who don't know, Singularity University is also it's a place where Ray Kurzweil is heavily involved, and also Ben Goertzel, right? And so Ray Kurzweil, though, being in many ways not actually the father of the term transhumanism, I believe that was Werner Vinge. But he's basically that is Kurzweil's basically the guy that popularizes transhumanism, right, in the contemporary mind. And she just has nothing but nice things to say about what she calls Maslow-inspired evolutionary entrepreneurs. And so basically, her conversation with Mark Donahue at Singularity University was basically how, basically through public-private partnerships that are driven by a Maslowian sense, not of just self-actualization, but a self-actualization that is rewarded by some sort of contribution to the broader collective. So it's not just that she was like theoretically touting these ideas, like she's hanging out with these people, right, at Singularity University.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was in 2018. Okay, it was only a year before she died that she was there, touting the same stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this chapter, I'm gonna have to read this. I just remembered that I had it. It's not that long. I'll try to send you a link to this book if you can get a hold of it. It's pretty good because it shows she was saying this stuff, like you said, like a long time ago. But I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff in this book. The reason, you know who Willis Harman is, right?
He pops up in this article because he ran the World Business Academy, I think it is, and she was a fellow of the World Business. Let's see, it's a Business Academy. Yeah, World Business Academy. She was a fellow, and so was one of her other New Age buddies, Deepak Chopra, and I think there's others, like I want to say maybe Jean Houston or the other one, Hazel Henderson. One or both of those women are there, but these people all tend to pop up. I wonder, do any of those names pop up in that Millennium book there?
Here's the essay contributors are Carl Rogers, Jonas Salk, Timothy Leary, Frederick Pohl, Carl Pribram, Gene Houston, Willis Harman, Harvey Cox, Marilyn Ferguson, Michael Murphy, Alberto Villoldo, Donald Mankin, Ken Dickwald, Lonnie Barback, Rick Carlson, Livio Venardi, Stanley Krippner, Arthur Hastings, Barbara Marks Hubbard, and Barry McWaters. Those are all the individuals that contributed to this book. But the Harman chapter is interesting because he was saying that work, all of this is basically what will life be like in the 21st century, right? Writing from the vantage point of 1981. And the Harman chapter is the chapter where he says that the future will be post-Protestant boomer work ethic. There will be no longer any idea of a corporate self-made man, any of that kind of stuff. That's all going away to a post-industrial society where you will have universal basic income, social credit, and get this, a needs-based economy where there are essential and non-essential workers. So he was actually proposing in 1981 what was rolled out in the CUF.
And that reminds me of, I think it's a Rifkin book, The End of Work, but it also sort of dovetails with the Megatrends book I believe that was in the mid 80s as well. And that's John Naisbitt. He's another New Ager. He's at the World Future Society, which was founded by Barbara Marx Hubbard. I believe
There we go.
Advisory board. And yeah, Megatrends is all, I mean, each chapter is set out as like a shift from, you know, the world before and, you know, their new futurist, new age paradigm. And there's a whole section in there on how economics and business will change, and basically parallels the same ideas there. But you're saying Harman in there explicitly uses essential workers. He uses that phrase.
I've done a few talks on the book. I don't know that he's phrasing it in the exact same way. It's the idea is there. Let me see exactly what he says. He says that basically when the future society comes about, when they have it transitioned over into the needs-based economy, he says that work will be partitioned out in terms of workers who are necessary and then workers who aren't. And there will be privileges for the workers that are necessary. Like they'll have, like he says something like, if you need you won't have a car unless you have a job that requires a car, right? So in other words, the needs-based economy that applies to the workers as well. So, but I don't remember if he uses the exact phrase essential and non-essential, but he does say that only certain workers will be given the rights to have certain, you know, blessings like having a car. He says work. Well, by the way, he also says a lot of work will come from home. People will be working from home. He says that we'll transition into a tiny living, austerity type of living. So you won't have, everything will be based on needs. He's saying not based on merit or want or growth. It'll be based on pure need. But I don't recall he's saying a lot of the same stuff that Ferguson says too, and Fritjof Capra, who I lectured through the Capra book. But I don't know that he explicitly uses the phrase, like he's citing Maslow here. I'd have to go reread the essay, but it's basically the idea. But I don't know if he might use the phrase. I just don't remember.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Maslow was one of her mentors as well. It was actually one of her deeper mentors. And then you mentioned Michael Murphy in that book. Is that the Michael Murphy that set up Esalen? I'm pretty sure it's got to be. So when Hubbard was in contact with Maslow had this thing that he called the Psychian network, and it was a network of basically a bunch of futurists and New Agers who all shared the same vision for the future. And one of the institutions in there, Murphy is one of the people that pops up in that Psychian network. But then there was also a series of other, I believe the Esalen Institute itself is mentioned in his Psychian
It is.
network.
It's Michael Murphy of Esalen.
Okay, yeah. And so also in the Psychian network are several either human potential or Esalen connected institutions. And so one is the Personal Growth Labs and Basic Encounters group that was conducted by Bill Schutz at Esalen. Then there's the Kairos Center, which is also connected to Esalen, the Shalal Institute connected to Esalen, the Topanga Human Development Center connected to Esalen, Center for Human Potential also connected with Esalen. So within this Psychian network that Maslow set up and put Hubbard in contact with these folks was the Esalen Institute, which is just, puts all these people again in the exact same orbit.
Yes.
And the other
Now,
thing that's worth noting as well is that Maslow, in do I have it over here, in toward a being toward a psychology of being, in the second edition, he actually uses the term transhumanism. He
yeah.
says basically that there's three phases of psychology, or three schools of psychology. So the first was the behavioral school, right? It's basically that all psychology it can be deduced or reduced to basically neurological responses to environmental stimuli. Then there's basically the Freudian school, which basically focused on all things subconscious, in the way that the subconscious mind impacts or affects the cognitive processes. And then Maslow, he came up with his third force of psychology that he called his positive or humanistic psychology. And he said, then there's going to be a fourth phase, and it's going to be transpersonal and, quote, transhuman. So he uses that term in, I want to say is it 60s or 70s? I can't remember, and I can't reach the book without knocking stuff over.
Well, Maslow, by the way, was, a lot of people don't know, I've read that he was actually working in as part of MK Ultra. Have you read that?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Yeah. So he wasn't just formulating the needs, but a lot of those studies were part of MK Ultra. I think, I'm going from memory, it's either in that obscure book that somebody wrote about MK Ultra in Australia, or it's in John Marx's essay. He wrote a really long essay in a sociology magazine it's got a lot of information in it that's not in his MK Ultra mentoring candidate book. It's a whole separate essay that I found. But there's a lot of good details in there, because he shows that the Gettinger psychology, you know how they like the scale of like INTF, INTJ, all of that. That's all.
I think what it's called. Yeah.
That's all. That was all MK Ultra study.
Okay.
And what they were looking for was a way to, originally what they were looking for was a way to classify world leaders on the basis of their proclivities and psychological profile. So, can I guess what Putin's going to be up to if I know his, if he's an INTJ? That was the purpose originally as to why they were doing it, but it actually turned into a bunch of other things.
Well, that doesn't surprise me in a lot of ways, because as we sort of noted already, a lot of the psychonauts, a lot of the psychedelic gurus float around in these circles. So you mentioned Timothy Leary in that book. The story I was going to tell about Constance, when she meant to, I'm pretty sure it was at Marilyn Ferguson. When I do the interview with her, I'll make sure she corrects the record if I get it infelicitously here. But Timothy Leary was at one. It was in the, she goes there and she's in the backyard and they're having a little cookout. Timothy Leary's there, right? And Michael Murphy, obviously, again, Esalen, all their various psychedelic retreats and whatnot. And Aldous Huxley was one of the big names that used to give speeches at Esalen, and he's actually the guy that coins the term human potential movement, which Maslow basically drives forward with his humanistic psychology as well. And obviously, Huxley being, The Doors of Perception, right? The famous book on his peyote, I think.
Yeah, I just lectured through 2 weeks ago, Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell. So we just covered that. And then before that, Frank and I, we lectured through every chapter of Brave New World too. So those are fresh in my mind.
Very cool. Yeah,
and Huxley had a key role in Esalen too, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. And the interesting thing about the quote from that book is that, so Doors of Perception, we all know that is, but that's where Jim Morrison got his name for his band, right? But it's actually a William Blake quote, right? And William Blake was really into theater and stuff like that, right? So it sort of is it's not just the tip of the hat to the whole psychonaut paradigm and movement, but it lets you know that underneath that is sort of this Gnostic.
It's Neoplatonic magic, right? Cleanse the doors of perception, so you can perceive the the essences of things and this kind of stuff.
And Hubbard says in this is at a speech at the Institute of Noetic Sciences in 2015. And there's a quote here. She says, "We took the next 5 years and said our purpose would be by 2020, magic number, right? We all remember how fun that year was, we would connect enough of the co-creators in health, education, economics in every sector of human endeavor in every culture, and show up by 2020 as the beginning of the next stage of human self-evolution. Then we would become the Gnostic human. We would become humans that actually incarnate the genius of evolution, the supernatural powers of evolution. I'm sorry, supramental powers of evolution. So
By the way, yeah, have you heard her Barbara Marx Hubbard's speech at the Democratic National Convention in 1984?
Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna. I'll put that in the chat for everybody because it's a good one to listen to. So, because
she wanted to make a Department of Peace, and what's
right, exactly.
One of her, I guess, proteges, you could say, was not Marilyn Ferguson. She's running for president now. It's on the tip of my tongue. Marilyn Williamson.
Is this the New Age candidate?
Yeah. And a lot of these books, she gives blurbs on a lot of these books, Marianne Williamson. But Marianne Williamson, if you look at her campaign platform, one of the things that she's running on is to set up a Department of Peace. So I mean, it's clearly Hubbard's idea that she's clearly influenced by Hubbard.
Well, I hope it's the Department of Peace that the BlackRock CEO was talking about, where he said we will force you to do these things. So if you don't want to go along with all of the woke ESG, DEI, blah blah blah, we'll just force it down your throat. He said. So hopefully it's that kind of a peace, right?
Yeah, and what she also says though is that so in creating the Department of Peace, it would be a process of transferring or converting the military into the Department of Peace, right? So basically, you can sort of infer what that means. It's basically like, we've carved up the globe. We basically have, this what they're going to call the multilateral world order, which is basically a uniform one world order. And in the process of that, we don't need bases around. We don't need to have kinetic conflict in the same way. So we could just take all that energy and basically use it to psychologically manipulate our populace into docile compliance with all things New Age.
Well, and to speak to that point, in the book, the Leary chapter, which I have read in this book, is about how scientists of today, you can't make this up, are a new kind of religious mystic. In fact, he says that the scientists of today are the new monastics. The monks of old tried to study and know God, and today's monastics and holders of the secrets of the universe are the scientists. And he says that the scientists are going to bring about, quote, liberation, which will bring about the age of transitions, and the future will be about IQ, whereas the past was about power and dominance or whatever, phallogocentrism. No, now he says it's going to be about the age of information. He says will be about IQ and brain power. This is his quote, not mine. Scientists of the world unite. In fact, he says that a scientific Illuminati can basically be the priest class of the future that will run society in our technocracy. And he says that, literally, he says that it is a future transhumanist order where genetic modification and cloning, and even GMO clones, so GMO human clones, he says, will bring about the promise of what Gaia has in potential. So Gaia has in potential, he's saying, the promise of this new clone future. And then he says, and if you want to understand, read Marilyn Ferguson's books, Brain Bulletin, the Coevolution Quarterly, right? So then he goes on to cite for all the other people that we've analyzed here, like Friedrich Capra. So he cites Capra, which I've lectured through his book. He cites other New Age quantum gibberish people. And he says that a social justice, postmodern, magical thinking worldview, I'm paraphrasing there. He doesn't say that, but he says that that's the future that we'll be in. He says because it will be a society based around. Let me see if he uses the word social justice. He says Goodman's view, like works of art and models of physics, can be properly viewed as samples, just as a fabric swatches accurately reflect the whole bolt. Fabric swatches. I don't know what he's talking about. Certain works of art accurately reflect forms, feelings, and affinities of all of life. These are taken from Harvard psychologists, writings who's performing a valuable function of psychology by personalizing, humanizing, and empowering the intelligent public so that we can have a space migration future. So we're going to go into space. So it's literally, he says that we should have, NASA needs to expand into basically Space Force so that we can go and seed the universe off world. And he says this is the great thing about the 60s cultural revolution was that it freed up sexuality so that we can basically have space sex. I'm not joking. There's actually a chapter in the book on space sex. And when we have sex in space, he says, then it'll be, by the way, he mentions the CIA, Leary. The problem of getting all the experimental subjects to take all of the LSD in the hard days, the CIA spent $25 million to dose unsuspecting people with it. That's, by the way, Timothy Leary was part of that because he was working with the CIA to do that. So there he is admitting to that, bragging about it. Long story short, then he says that evolutionary agents are the smart intellectual class that will guide humanity like a new priest class into the notion that man is God. And so he goes full Crowleyan, and actually I don't know if he cites Crowley in this or he cites Crowley in the he wrote the introduction to John C. Lilly's autobiography, which he calls Lilly a new Aleister Crowley. But he says that the principles of Lucifer, when the way that Lucifer rebelled against Jehovah, he says that man will rebel against the limitations of nature like Lucifer rebelled against Jehovah, and will become gods.
I was trying to peel this sticker off so you get a better sense of it. There's a barcode on here. Here's Barbara Marx Hubbard's autobiography. It's called The Hunger of Eve, and check out the awesome graphics on it. You got a apple or a fruit with a bite out of it, and look what's obvious. In the middle of that bite. Oh, it's the universe, all the cosmic secrets of God's creation. And she says she has a whole section in here where she basically does the cliche Gnostic thing, where they invert the Genesis story, right? Lucifer's the hero and he gives the fruit to Adam and Eve so they can get out of the prison that God trapped them in and all that. They're all, that's what's, as I did this research, they always pop up in the same circle. And they're always saying the same things, both in terms of technocracy, transhumanism, but they all have this, right? This mystery school, Gnostic, Luciferian.
So let's get back to that essay, because you get into, after you cover her book, you get into Malthusian limits to growth. So maybe first tell us, because there's some people are like, they're not familiar with Barbara Marx Hubbard, who she is, why she matters. She's in the circles of all these boomer new agers, right? And she's one of these thought leader, change agent type peoples. But tell us more about her, and then let's get into Hubbard and limits of growth.
Okay, so her background is she is the heir to the Louis Marx toy fortune, so she's basically independently wealthy. She came in contact with Eisenhower early on in her life. I believe her father was friends with Eisenhower, and that was how she got the meeting with him. And they had this discussion about, what is our technology going to do for us in the future? They just had the whole, the end of World War II, and there was the, fear of the nuclear bomb, and she's trying to get him to tell her what can we do positively with it. And she says, well, he didn't have a good answer for me, so that set her on this journey to sort of figure out, how we could use technology to usher in this new age. And so she comes in contact with a lot of important people like Maslow, Jonas Salk. Actually, they had a very close relationship. My next piece is going to focus a lot on that and how their philosophies. I think you covered Survival of the Wisest.
Yeah, I've covered Survival of the Wisest, and Salk has an essay in the Millennium book as well.
Okay, yeah, and I think it's Survival of the Wisest, or what's the other one? Well, he did one with his son.
The other one is Man Unfolding.
Yeah, it's in one of those. Which one's the one where he talks about this dialectic between being and ego? Whichever one that.
Well, he kind of repeats himself. I know that is in Survival of the Wisest.
Okay, so if you read enough Hubbard, you'll see echoes of their same rhetoric.
Yes. Correct. By the way, you're right, absolutely, that all these people cite each other, because Maslow is cited in the Willis Harman section of this book. Friedrich Capra cites Kessler often for holons and from Ghost in the Machine, and they're all citing Friedrich Capra a bunch in this book, so they're all in the same circles and citing each other.
Yeah, and in the Salt book, one of the things he's touched on with this being and ego. So first of all, being is clearly a reference to Maslow's psychology of being, right? It's basically a Maslowian sort of euphemism there. And one of the things he touches on is how consciousness needs to evolve with technology and science, and what that means is basically a new system of values, a new culture, and that's basically a lot of what Hubbard sort of what I guess she saw was her purpose in ushering this new age. So she early on gets connected with people like Maslow, solved this Psychian network, people at Esalen, but then later on, she sort of gets pushed up to the level of becoming a candidate for vice president, as we noted, under she's going to run with the guy that went against Reagan, Walter Mondale. But at another point in her career, she comes across Maurice Strong, who was the first Director General of the United Nations Environmental Program. She comes across one of the co-founders of the Club of Rome, Aurelio Pecci, and they have this little debate about limits to growth, and they agree, they halfway agree and halfway don't. So people can think back to one of those quotes you read earlier, where she was talking about this issue of how do we evolve without on this finite planet, which she's like, well, we can't just limit and restrict everything, but we can't just grow infinitely. And so the debate she has with Pecci is that, she felt that Pecci was too Malthusian. He wanted to do too much population control, too much resource micromanagement, too much rationing of natural resources and stuff. She felt that technology, as it evolved, would enable us to either extract more resources or use our resources more efficiently. And part of that process, getting us back to her interest in space travel, was she thought that, if we could get off world, then this would also solve part of that problem. But so she was also very.
It's also space getting laid, though. That's because they all talk about that too. Leary talks about it, and there's actually a chapter in the Millennium Book on sex in the future. Like I said, right? So there's the book, by the way, for those that are wondering. You can see it, and there's a chapter on sex in the future, and if I recall, the sex in the future chapter talks about a lot of the change things that we see today, if you catch my meaning.
I don't.
People changing.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
I'm trying to avoid the algorithm, you know what I mean?
I know that, but I'm trying to figure out
the future of SEX, right? Let me see. Like it's really wacky, right? So basically all the stuff that is prohibited in the 1970s and 80s will be allowed, and basically she ends the thing by saying that there'll be tantric space sex. So this is what the boomers were telling us we could look forward to in the year 2023. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I was just, you make me think, and then going back to the whole Gnostic thing and the whole, the idea of this transmutation, right? The transmutation of male and female, and man and machine, right? Like the boundaries between these natural categories, right? And have to be sort of dissolved and then transmuted.
Correct.
And I often, the more I've thought about it and looked at it, I really think part of the heavy politicization of the changing people actually is one step towards getting us used to blurring the lines also between the body and the machine,
absolutely,
or the actual self and the digital, right, simulacrum.
Correct.
Right?
TRANSGENDER is the preparation for transhumanism, 100%. Absolutely. because there's nothing that defines the human or what it is to be human. So you begin by there's nothing that defines the biology, there's nothing that defines the gender. Now we can say there's nothing that actually defines the human. And all of these texts, as John is pointing out, many of which we have made our way through. For example, this one is a key one, as I said, Ghost in the Machine by Kessler, because when Chopra writes his Turning Point, he cites Kessler's Ghost in the Machine and the holon idea throughout the book, because the argument of holons is that nature are these holistic systems, and the holistic system is made up of a bunch of little systems, and you can't be any individual at all other than what the system allows. And they argue then therefore the world system, the Gaia world system, dictates that you can't have any system or ethics or values outside of the Gaia system according to their new, transcendent Aquarian age, right? Some people, by the way, allege, I don't know if it's true or not, but some people think that Marilyn Ferguson, that it was actually Willis Harman that wrote this and she just put her name on it. I don't know if that's true, but all of this stuff says the same stuff, right? This is, I found the John C. Lilly's autobiography where you'll notice here, and I'll put this in the book cam for you guys so you can see it. Timothy Leary's introductory essay notes that John C. Lilly is a new Crowley, and he mentions the Esalen Institute. So check this out. Right there. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry, John.
Oh, no. You just made me think. I mean, that, what you mentioned about this, these microsystems within the macro system. I mean, it illustrates why Hubbard and Salk and others had this emphasis on changing the culture and changing the values, basically to catch up with where they knew technology was going to accelerate in turn, right? So it wasn't enough just to transmute the categories of nature through the mastery of science and technology, but once you did that and you reached a certain precipice, right, you're going to be so far beyond what most people value and what most people find traditionally, worthwhile and culturally sane, that no one's going to accept the transhuman technologies unless we also change, right, the categories of the mind that we use to identify with the categories of reality, which is basically this whole process of cultural change, all things woke and critical theory and everything.
And that's why Klaus's books nowadays basically also focus on that too. Klaus talks about new values and a new covenant and a new ethic for humanity, because he realizes, like all these authors too, that you have to change the perceptual categories, the ethics, all of that before humans are going to be able to, before humans will accept what they want to shove down our throat, like the BlackRock guy said.
Yeah, I mean, and you kind of see it like, the sort of the two parts of this broader systemic dialectic that we're sort of laying out. You can sort of see it reflected in the titles here, right? COVID-19, the Great Reset, okay? The Great Reset. So this is resetting the actual, right, the medical system, the economic system, the stakeholder capitalism, all that stuff. And then his next piece, though, is the great narrative. What's the story that we tell to basically, make it seem like to comport with the Great Reset, basically, right? What is the story of values and culture that we're going to use to usher this in, basically?
Absolutely, bro. Really good work. You're singing my tune here, my little Klaus ditty. You're singing it. I like it. Now, in the essay, you move on past the Club of Rome limits of growth. You cite multiple sort of WEF connected, UN connected people. We get into Paul Ehrlich, right, and Holdren, eco-science, a lot of population text about how we got to reduce population. Then you get into this some of these newer texts like reinventing prosperity, and what is all this about? Can you tell us about what how does the stakeholder capitalism stuff fit into this? Because a lot of people think that, well, how could capitalism doesn't fit with this, when in actual fact, I know actually capitalism is the driving force behind this in terms of monopoly capital. So how does this tie into the later stuff like the Global Earth Charter and all that?
So, so to tie it back to Hubbard, so as I mentioned, so one of one of the people that she cavorted with was Maurice Strong, and Strong was also on the global advisory board of the World Future Society. So they were both there together. They were both part of this thing called the State of the World Forum. The State of the World Forum was basically a lesser known, what I would call sort of an NGO and out of the round table style. And this was convened by Mikhail Gorbachev, who had set up, I believe it's Earth Charter with Maurice Strong. It was a combination of Gorbachev's Green Cross International and Strong's Earth Council. And both of those came out of, for people who don't know, it was Strong who set up the first, it was the UNCHI, so the UN Conference on Human Environment. This is 1971 or 72, the same exact year that the Club of Rome published Limits to Growth. And then 20 years later, and well, I should note that out of that conference comes the UNEP. It was the result of that was the establishment of the United Nations Environmental Program. 20 years later, in 91 or 92, we had the first Rio conference. And out of the Rio conference, again, Maurice Strong had set it up. He also was the guy that effectively coined the term sustainable development it was called the Brundtland Conference in the mid 80s or late 80s. So by the time of the Rio conference, they have the sustainability language. And out of the Rio conference comes Agenda 21, which then 10, 20 years later is converted into Agenda 2030, which gets us, which converts what were previously called the Millennium Development Goals. So in around 2000, we had these Millennium Development Goals. And one of them was a sustainable development goal. Come Agenda 2030, it's pretty much the same goals, but they're all called sustainable development goals. And most people think that they include, it's largely, green energy and, other Malthusian types of policies, but it also encompasses everything from one of the particular goals emphasizes literally public-private partnerships and stakeholders, right? It uses the stakeholder language, right? And I should note that the whole idea of stakeholder capitalism, right? This was Klaus Schwab's idea, and it was pitched to the World Economic Forum at the third annual meeting, which was the same meeting at which Aurelio Pecci brought the limits to growth thesis. So the WEF basically adopted both the stakeholder capitalism premise and the limits to growth premise that becomes the sustainable development goals today at the exact same time. And it's also worth noting that another person that was at that third annual meeting, the honorary sponsor was the founder of the Bilderberg Group. So that's Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, right? Former Nazi SS.
Yeah, basically more Malthusians, right? And it's important to note that you've got Prince Bernhard, Queen Beatrix, which founded basically Beberg under the guidance and recommendation and wisdom of David Rockefeller, but also Mikhail Gorbachev played a key role in this burgeoning sort of New Age Earth Summit that you're talking about of Agenda 21. So that's because Gorbachev was a member of the Club of Rome, and so this is not contrary to what we think of as like this transcends the Cold War capitalist communist dialectic. This is the supra-international future order of a kind of Malthusianism that's it's depopulation with a humanitarian face is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and it's the public-private partnerships through the stakeholder capitalism that will effectively facilitate the micromanagement of the human and natural resources.
And this is why Larry Fink is saying that all of the policies that we're pushing, like the DEI and the basically the woke corporate stuff, that is the policies that are being set by these people.
Yeah, and then it's incentivized and basically enforced through the ESG scoring, right?
That's what I meant. The ESG. There's ESG, DEI, and then there's one other one that they use stands for the new ethic base. This is the new ethic that Klaus is talking about, this new covenant and this and it goes back to this Earth Charter stuff, right?
Right, and there was a guy. I can't. His name escapes me, but he's a BlackRock guy, and he was at one of these WEF meetings, and he was talking about they're going to come up with an app that basically tracks your carbon footprint, right? And so Larry Fink, by the
Yes.
way, is a trustee of the World Economic Forum in the meantime, right? Who also runs BlackRock. So you have this financial company, which by the way also funds or has funded the Sesame social credit system in China. Right, so you can think of basically this app that's going to track your carbon footprint. It's just going to be one of the metrics or one of the features of this broader social credit system that will enforce and facilitate the ESG to basically micromanage all your human and natural resources.
Right. So it's just basically total control and has nothing to do with liberty or economics or anything. It's literally about total control and bringing in the technocracy. Because as you note at the end of your essay, you couldn't have the new ethic of what Klaus is pushing and what BlackRock's pushing, their so-called ethics, if you had not had the previous sort of prophets of the new ethic and the new covenant with Barbara Marx Hubbard and all these boomer era new agers like Marilyn Ferguson and Willis Harman and all these characters, correct?
Yeah, and a bunch of them pop up at the State of the World Forum as well. I was trying to pull up, I thought I had it bulleted off there. But a lot of them also cavorted at that State of the World Forum along with Strong, Gorbachev, and Hubbard. So these names, and they also, a lot of them have floated around at something called the HeartMath Institute, which is also promoted by Hubbard in several of her books, right? And so they sort of
And what is that? What is that one? What's that about?
Oh, the HeartMath. So there's a for-profit and a nonprofit, HeartMath Inc., HeartMath Institute. It's a biofeedback wearable that tracks your heart rate, and it's got different applications. So there's like a whole new age application to it. But I actually wrote about it in my book and didn't really even realize that I did, because they have several different products. So sort of uses a multi-level marketing scheme where you have like people that are trained in heart math, breathing techniques, and how to use the device, and then they'll train other people or maybe teach them to be coaches, and then you can all self-actualize your Maslowian psychology through this process. And there's other meditations and things that they do. But in the schools, what they'll do is basically, this is one of the various, as I mentioned, the socio-emotional biofeedback wearables that while the students are engaged in a given lesson, they'll track the student's heart rate to see, basically what their effective state is. And there's others that they can combine it with, EEG helmets and things like that, facial recognition. So they make sure that, the students are they happy, confused, frustrated, etc. But as far as the new age applications, there's also something at HeartMath called the Global Coherence Initiative. And what they do is, so you put either your M wave or your inner balance, whichever device you want to use for your HeartMath registry, and there'll be like a monthly meditation goal, and they'll post it on the website. And you hook up your little wearable and you go on the website, and then it shows like a graphic of a globe with all these points of light, and each of those points of light is supposed to indicate or represent a particular person across the globe that's also doing your meditation. And you're supposed to meditate on a common theme, and they typically just mirror whatever is the most resounding propaganda that you could pick up on any TV channel. So one of them that didn't make it in my article, but it's on my Telegram, is because I got a lot of pushback from people. Apparently, a lot of people use heart math and like it a lot, and so they were like, "There's nothing wrong with heart math. They're not going to use it to, sort of lull us into this complacency." But one of the meditations was right around, I want to say, mid 2021, so it was like during a time when things were easing up, the whole lockdown thing was kind of chilling out a little bit. And the meditation said, we know you're all, stressed out. You've been, boxed in. We know you're ready to get out and, just be a human again. But don't forget that, right, you're part of the collective, and that you have responsibilities not to spread anything to anybody else. So make sure that you don't, we need to meditate collectively and to channel sort of the energy to remain peaceful and remain compliant in the home. So largely what these things are used for is to sort of get everybody physiologically on the same wavelength,
yeah.
so that they are equally receptive to propaganda.
So this relates then to in your next article you cover the neurofeedback wearables, right?
Yeah, that's the one there. Yeah.
Gotcha. And that again is tying back into the fact that she is connected to the Singularity University of Kurzweil, right? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, and there's also a similar product. It's called Heart Sync. Okay, and this is developed by a guy named Mikey Siegel. Mikey Siegel was at Esalen. He was doing a workshop called Hacking Consciousness, and he's done a bunch of other studies where he gets groups of people together with this similar style of biofeedback wearable heart rate monitor to do different meditations. And one of the uses he says they could be used for is like corporate board meetings, right? So like if you got an executive that's got, you know, the ESG policy, and maybe a lot of your, you know, managerial class of workers right at the board, maybe they want to not go along with ESG. Maybe they want to try a different route. Well, before we even have this debate at the board, we're going to make sure we all get in this proper heart sequence, and it'll make you nice and suggestible and docile, and make you more receptive to the predetermined. It sort of enhances what's been known as the Delphi technique, right? This artificial consensus creation, and this just gives it a physiological sort of leveraging.
Yes, that makes perfect. So basically applying a bunch of the techniques of Eastern religion, mind control, MK Ultra, to the corporate setting to ensure that corporate leaders go along with this. And the next book that you cover in that is her 52 codes for conscious self-evolution, so that we can evolve past Homo sapien and become Homo universalis. That was actually what she was saying in that article from 1981, as we saw. And this is all, again, about the evolutionary shift towards transhumanism. That can't just be done through technology and through mass media. It also requires a new spirituality. This is why on my channel we focus so heavily on a lot of the religious deception, the religious elements, and the religious heresies that are pushed, because they're not just pushed for individual heretical people who are narcissists and they want to start their own cult, or this is part of an overall larger agenda. And to have the push towards world government, as many of the writings of the elite themselves say, I mean, again, we saw 100 years ago, H.G. Wells, over 100 years ago, H.G. Wells wrote a book called God, the Invisible King, where he said there'll be a new fake world religion that will run. Well, guess what? These people represent that new fake world religion, and they're rolling it out, and it serves the interests of the corporate technocratic state. That's the purpose of the new agey crap. That's it. I mean, I think as a Christian, Orthodox, we can analyze it as having a more darker satanic deception. But the ultimate function of this stuff is just to integrate you into the Borg hive mind. That's the purpose of the fake false spirituality. And this is where you take your next essay, right, with her other book about 52 codes or something.
Yeah, I mean, in that book, it's interesting to note, there's a section in there, code 33, where she calls for human beings to come forward as a new norm. So I mean, in several works, she uses the term new norm, and in several works, so another one, Birth 2012 and Beyond, there's a section titled 2012 to 2020 and beyond. So she repeatedly references 2020 as this inflection point. She uses this new norm language, and is promoting all of the transhumanist technocratic stuff that is going to be sort of the impetus for that transition, while over the process of that time, she's saying we need to basically galvanize people around this new system of values. And it's this idea, this sort of this new age religion. I mean, this was also emphasized in Brave New World in chapter 5, right, when they have the solidarity services.
Yeah, the religious service, yeah.
And it's all revolves around the greater being, right? But this greater being is basically just sort of this meld of the collective body of consciousness, I guess.
Yeah, they have basically an SEX magic ritual, and they all meld together, and that's the manifestation of the power of the great being. Yeah, exactly.
and with psychedelics, right? So this gets us back again to Huxley,
Exactly.
right, who popularized it. And it was Julian, his brother. He largely got that idea, or it was at least the way he framed it in that chapter, was in many ways inspired by Julian. He wrote his own novel called What Dare I Think? And in this whole thing, his whole novel, the crux of it is about how in the new scientific era there would have to, it basically deals with the problem of what do you do with the religious or spiritual aspect of the mind, right? Like you have to do something with it in this new scientific age. So you have to come up with some new form of religion that would comport with the technology.
I'm glad that you mentioned too Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, because a lot of people overlook him and his influence, and you cite her in regard to his discussion of the Christ consciousness, the cosmic Christ, and all this, which really is a lot of parallels with Hegel. And I just did an interview the other day covering Hegel's really important for the process philosophy of the transhumanists, because classic Platonism often had problems dealing with change and how to account for change if the Platonic system is the case. And so Aristotle is one representation of how to account for change in regard to what deficiencies may or may not exist in Plato. But by the time we get to Hegel, we have a unique approach to emphasizing change within a sort of quasi-Platonic, Kabbalistic, Neoplatonic system. And so Hegel is important because he proposes this idea that that all of reality, even inanimate matter, is through a dialectical process evolving to becoming self-conscious of itself as self-consciousness, right? And so eventually all reality will be not just self-conscious, but also God-conscious. So God is an emergent property. Again, what's his face from Singularity, Kurzweil says, I don't believe in God yet, because God is an emergent deity, a deus ex machina, which is again all part of the transhumanist. So, but you couldn't have any of this without Pierre Teilhard de Chardin saying that the noosphere, as he calls it, the mental sphere, that everything is evolving to the imago point, same principle in Hegel, to ultimate divine self-consciousness. So basically the universe is a pantheistic process becoming God. We're all part of that process to become God, and the technological advancements are the means by which the evolution of the God being from within the again, Star Child, from within the created order, will produce the God figure, and that's why Teilhard is useful to these figures.
Yeah, and it's it also builds on again that whole Gnostic narrative, right? I mean, with the fruit again being the
right, knowledge gives you godhood, exactly.
Yeah, and so with that knowledge, right, the ultimate expression of the pinnacle of knowledge is basically technology. So this artifact basically is the manifestation of the idea, right? And to use sort of Hegel's idea about ideas driving the material dialectic. And then at that point, right,
yep.
Now you basically interface with the technology itself. And it was interesting that, a lot of the New Age folks that her colleagues were like, they're aghast at the idea of technological determinism or biological determinism, right? Any sort of a Malthusian or Darwinian or transhumanist sort of teleology. But what I tried to get across was that there are two paths that lead to the same point. I mean, one is basically just biological material determinism. The other one is intellectual determinism or conscious evolution, right, or conscious determinism. But whether you want to focus on sort of the material process of biological evolution, sort of becoming the Ubermensch or the Superman through like old school eugenics, or whether you want to say that consciousness evolves in the way that it evolves is how it manifests in the material reality of technology, they both come together in transhumanism one way or another. So, another way to say it is that, a lot of the New Age stuff, like when they talk about consciousness, right, they kind of reduce it to like vibrations and energies and frequencies. Okay, well, that's entirely under the domain of science and technology, right? Like if my consciousness, my inner monologue, the thing that I think is myself, if it's just a frequency or an energy or a wavelength, and I can enhance it or evolve it with a wearable or an implantable,
right,
who are you to have any? How can you have any argument against that? If it gets you to the same place as a meditation bell or deep breathing or psychedelics. So you could look at these, they're all technologies, right? And so,
Right.
My argument was, where do you draw the line then, right? Like, why are these sort of low tech versions any better than the high tech versions? And I'm not sure that I got the answer that I was looking for, but I mean, I don't think you can divide the two. I think they're basically part of the same
Now,
paradigm.
interesting, as you move on in this essay, you get into curious figures who you say, and I've heard this before. Lawrence Rockefeller is one of her beloved patrons, right? Barbara Marx Hubbard has a patron in the character of Lawrence. And another reason that Lawrence is relevant in regard to recent live streams that we've done is that Lawrence is a long-time, big-time proponent and patron of alien stuff. Lawrence is he has his own personal fascination in the UFO alien phenomenon. He comes up in a lot of the literature. He actually is a patron of a lot of the UFO alien research and disclosure community people, which to me that would be suspect as well. And again, to me, that speaks to manipulation and monetary funding for these networks of deception. And in fact, a lot of the New Age stuff ties in with panspermia and alien cults and alien baloney as well. Now, I know that's not the focus of your paper here, but that is an element where alien cults tie into the New Age through Lawrence Rockefeller.
Yeah, and I can't articulate it that well because I haven't read enough about it or studied it enough. But just in my cursory research into the New Age, you always end up coming across the alien stuff, right? And vice versa, right? There's this weird overlap, right? And you might be on the same wavelength as me. Like I would surmise that the aliens are basically the entities or the demons or the spirits that people channel, right? When they're channeling. You know what? Somebody told me about this book the other day, a couple weeks ago, and I got it written down. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a lecture through this book. It's good. And I think there's a 100% totally a parallel between what Father Stephen Rose is covering when he covers the notion of demonic possession and the experiences of those who claim to channel entities, ET, alien, and the abduction experiences. Now, not everything. Some of that's baloney. Some of it's fake. But there are elements of this which I do think, do definitely overlap with the UFO phenomenon. And so, and I think that's 100% demonic. For those that are interested, if you can go back on my channel about 6 years ago where we did a lecture through this text. And I think he's really good on it. I mean, he was writing this way ahead of its time. Forget exactly what year Father Rose wrote this. I think there's a later chapter where Hiram Monk Damascene or something like this. So he wrote this in 1975, and then Hiram Monk Damascene, I think in 2013, added on a little bit towards the end of the book. But I mean, there's a lot of critiques of the UN, the New Age movement in this book as well.
Okay. Yeah. As you were talking, it made me think of I think you actually did a stream on this not too long ago. Childhood's End, right? The who's the guy, the author?
Yeah, Arthur C. Clarke, who was a big fan of Crowley stuff, also reportedly a PEDO. I've done a couple streams on Clarke recently. Yeah, and that book, the Corellan, the alien figure, is a demon. Yeah, he's the overlord who basically tricks human beings into giving him the firstborn generation of children that are evolved to have these abilities that Barbara Marx Hubbard was talking about, that the next phase of humanity will evolve to have, X-Men superpowers and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, he was also a member of the World Future Society as well, right? So it puts him, one step removed from Hubbard, right? And he's also the author of Space Odyssey, right? Which is entirely
absolutely
Star Child, Masonic, become God narrative as well. Yeah.
Now, and if you get into 2010, especially the movie, it's even clearer because it's explicitly a neo-Gnostic paradigm where we transcend bodily limitations. We're uploaded to the monoliths, which actually the monoliths are basically like giant floating AI hard drives. So you upload your consciousness to the big black hard drive in the sky. There's actually millions of these, and then they go out and populate the universe in a kind of quasi-sexual ritual, which is what Tim Leary was talking about, which is also what Crowley says.
Well, the other interesting now, is this the one where the two ships, the American ship and the Soviet ship, right, have to go back to where Bowman was at? And it's basically the way that and I've not read the book, I've only seen the film, so I don't know if there's any incongruencies between the two, but it basically ends by you sort of the elite scientists or technocrats on these ships disobeying, right, the civil or political orders, right, because they're supposed to get on their ships and leave, and they're not, and they basically work together instead. And this parallels a lot of the work, or it echoes a lot of the work that Hubbard did with the Soviet American exchange programs.
With Gorbachev, right? Gorbachev is basically there as a key New Ager in that UN conference to help set up these was it the Earth Charter and all? What was the thing that Gorbachev? I know he's involved in the UN, but wasn't there something in San Francisco that he was explicitly involved in helping to set up when the Cold War comes to an end? You know what I'm talking about?
I think he had like a foundation or something around the.
That's it.
By the Presidio.
That's it. By the Presidio. That's it. Yeah. And so, the narrative of the movie, which by the way, I think it's set right as the Cold War was winding down. I think 2010 came out in like 1987, somewhere in there. So it's still technically during the Cold War, but the message is, stop fighting amongst yourselves over nation states. If you listen to science, you would be able to overcome these, petty differences, and you could transcend and become the gods of the universe. Because the end of the movie, like you said, I haven't read that book either, but the end of the movie, it's the human beings realize that they're the children of the sun, so they're the children of light. They're the sons of Lucifer. And they're allowed to go and repopulate every planet except for one. I forget which, is like Jupiter or something that they're not supposed to go to yet. But the AI overlord, which is basically like an advanced sort of quasi-alien, quasi-god entity, is allowing mankind to move to the next phase of this evolutionary process, which is what all these people are talking about. But they become gods, the children of the sun, basically. Which can then populate the universe.
Right, and in the previous movie, right, the first one, 2001, right, I mean, the climax happens when it's basically the conflict between humanity and the AI, right, and that through the process of ultimately overcoming it, right, Bowman then transcends, becomes the Star Child, and then in the next movie, right, he integrates back into the
in the third one, he becomes the AI, so that they meld into Harman. They become a transhumanist entity, it's full on. So it's like there's conflict, and then there's integration, which is just dialectics, exactly. Which the movie, if the film begins with dialectics through the battle of the apes, and the one ape that has the bone, which is the technology of warfare, he becomes the predominant ape. So evolutionary dialectics gives us the advance. Therefore, it's necessary for Bowman and Howell to have evolutionary conflict to see who the super being will be. But it turns out the synthesis. So thesis, antithesis, synthesis is always what gives us the Hegelian dialectic towards the omega point.
Yeah, I mean, and then it's very Masonic how the apes in the first one, right? Like when he goes, and when he sort of discovers technology, right? He's got that bone, right? And he's hitting that thing. And he sort of becomes his awareness of abstract geometry, right? Because he sees the curve in the bone, he sees the same curve in the moon, and he's like, "This is the same thing. This is right." It's the concept of the circle, and
that's a great point.
It rises right above the monolith, and the monolith is a square. So a circle and a square, or a square and compass, right?
Yes.
And it's through the mastery of geometry that you can master all methods of science and technology, architecture, engineering, and through that, right, the G in the middle, right, through the mastery of geometry, you can achieve gnosis and thereby become your own god. Right?
Oh yeah, that's great. Great point. Yeah. So I'm going to put the link to the article here. Let's go to the super chats if we can. It's been a great discussion here. Now your stuff is all, so I've got you linked there in terms of your articles over at Unlimited Hangout, which is Whitney website. And where's the best place to get your School World Order book?
If you just go to schoolworldorder.info, which is my website, there's a link to Trying Day. Best place to get it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll put that link too directly to Trying Day. And let's go to the super chats. We've got Mark A85, $5. Here's a question for John. Who would win in a kickboxing battle between Aldous Huxley and Richard Dawkins?
A kickboxing match? I'm gonna go with Dawkins because I'm pretty sure Huxley was super frail. Like he had a lot of he had a lot of health issues. So I'm gonna go with Dawkins on that.
All right, Mel U, $100 winning the super chat competition tonight. Thank you so much, Mel U. You are the man, Jay. Thank you for everything. Well, thank you, Mel U, because you paid for tonight's bills. Glitchy Rhythm, $5. I don't think it's a coincidence that I found Orthodoxy after 30 years of Protestantism. You're changing lives through your work. I can't thank you enough. After my firstborn son was born, became Orthodox. Thank you so much, Glitchy Rhythm. Really appreciate that. Let's see if I missed any. Adam 1912 says $20. I missed that earlier. He says I was late to the stream. Nice work. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Now, guys, head on over to. Do you have now you're on Twitter. What's the best social media place for people to keep up with you? And is Unlimited Hangout the main sort of place where your articles are housed?
Yeah, I'm pretty much writing for her pretty much exclusively at this point. I'm a lot slower than I'd like to be. So, but you can get them updated on my website, although my website doesn't get updated as frequently as I like. Best social media would be Twitter. Again, I pop in, try to do it at least once a week, but this is not my day job, so but I'll always get back to you at some point. I usually respond, maybe a few days late or something like that. Emails, awesome. If you ever send me an email, I always respond.
Okay, cool, dude. Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks for coming back on. Also, there was another thing that you did talk here that we didn't get to tonight. We can maybe do another interview in the future. This is a great conversation tonight, but you covered maybe a few last words on Moxie and data mining your kids, socio-emotional learning algorithms. What is this all about?
It's a topic that's in my book that I haven't talked a lot about in the several years I've done interviews, because it was a technology that's not exactly mainstreamed. But I got an ad in my my YouTube for this Moxie Robot, and it's basically a little bot, probably about this big. It's developed in partnership with Jim Henson Studios and Pixar. And it's supposed to help teach kids how to manage and parse their emotions. So it runs on a GPT AI, a social X GPT. So it means generative pre-trained transformer. It's a large language model of neural networks. So basically it can pick out language patterns and mimic them in ways it seems like it has a conscious language abilities. But it can do similar things with facial expressions, right? So it can face scan the students or the children, and it can mirror or mimic them, right? So if you smile, it'll smile back and things like that. And if the video that I have up there, it's on my Twitter, and it's on if you go to my website, there's links to my BitChute, my YouTube. And I walk through the privacy policies to show you all the different types of data that it keeps and how it uses that to evolve the GPT AI, and also to keeps a little profile on the kid to see all their different missions, so their emotional missions. And it's basically a newer version of something that I wrote about in the book. There's an older model called iRobIQ. They pitched them early on. They're supposed to help with kids that are autistic. I guess the data says that it helps autistic kids recognize emotions better, or something about the way the robot performs differently. But it's one of these things that I thought was important to cover because of all the hype around GPT AI.
Right.
And it's obviously commercially ready and being advertised. So I would surmise that you'll see this thing, if not popularized in the home, it'll definitely be eventually be in a classroom as well. So,
yeah. Excellent. Thank you for that. Terry77 sends $10. Says, can you suggest some titles on epistemology and Orthodox epistemology? If the elite are taking over our knowledge, it seems like we should know how to think. Well, that's why I did the whole course on the history of Western philosophy for Richard Grove. That course is linked in the show description. So you can watch my whole, I don't know, it comes out to like 30 hours of philosophy course there. But book-wise, I would say that Orthodox Dogmatic Theology, Volume 1 by Father Demetrius Staniloy is a necessary Orthodox epistemology course. Epistemology in general, I'd say read the W.J. Wood book on epistemology because he understands that virtue can't be divorced from epistemology. So thank you for that, Terry. All right, thank you, John, so much for coming back. Great conversation. You really know your stuff. I'm really impressed with how well researched everything is. So thank you so much for coming.
Always good to be back, man. Thanks much.
Absolutely. All right, thanks, dude. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
All right.